In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. We are 2.5 weeks through Lent, so I'm going to talk about a hymn that we use throughout the whole year, but is preserved during Holy Week and in the feasts, particularly today. It is commonly known as ⲓⲭⲆⲆⲆⲆ, or what was translated into English as verses of cymbals. But in actuality, its original name, according to our medieval manuscripts, is ⲓⲭⲆⲆⲆⲆ, or ⲡⲓⲭⲆⲆⲆ, or if we want to give it a name in English, it would be something like the salutation or the greeting. I want to preface by saying this is different from the kiss of peace, so the ⲡⲓⲆⲆⲆ, that's a different hymn entirely. So this is the greeting, the salutation, that's based on the word ⲓⲆ. So, or the Greek, right? So it's a Greek word and taken into Coptic as ⲓⲆ, spelled as you see here. In Greek it's spelled a little differently with this a as a diphthong of alpha and iota, ⲓⲆ. And typically we hear the word ⲓⲆismos in ⲓⲓⲆⲆ, so when we say ⲓⲓⲆⲆ ⲓⲓⲆismos, or when you say it outside of the Kiahki season in the Albash for the rest of the week, if you hear that for I think it's either Thursday or Friday, one of the two, some books include ⲓⲓⲆ. So ⲓⲓⲆ, just as a preface, right, we present you, or we offer you, we give you, and then it's imbi ⲓⲆismos, ⲓⲓⲆ imbi ⲓⲆismos, which because of the music we end up saying ⲓⲓⲆnembi, right? The jinkim on the mi gets moved with the eya and ne, which is totally fine, and that's actually proper Coptic chant, so ⲓⲓⲆnembi. We present you, or we offer you, or we give you the greeting, the salutation. It's not, as the current translations have it, we send you greetings. No, that's not what it's talking about. It's a particular greeting of the ⲓⲆ. And that's why the majority of the verses here have ⲓⲆ. And so, when we talk about ⲓⲆismos, we need to understand the development, because the current form that's used during most of the times of the year is actually not the oldest form that we have available to us. The oldest form available to us, as you see here on the screen, is a 10-verse hymn that was likely compiled, or is likely compiled in the monastery of St. Antonius, as per this manuscript, Vatican 38. تقال بعد مزامير باكر على ترتيب دير القديس أنطونيوس. The placement of the hymn itself, whether it's before or after the Psalms, differs from place to place, as Matins, initially the service of Matins included the Psalms, and later they were said before, so it's a little complex in terms of placement, but with regards to where it was created, this is really the only reference that's available to me at this time that mentions sort of a placement, in terms of, a provenance, rather. So this mentions the monastery of St. Anthony. However, by the 14th century, the hymn is present in several manuscripts outside of that region, and whether it's be this manuscript, which was transcribed near Asyut, or in other manuscripts near Abu Ma'ar's or Skeets, this hymn is present. You will recognize these 10 verses from what we chant on the three nightly feasts, as we call them, so the Nativity, the Theophany or Epiphany, and the Anastasis, or the Resurrection Feast, or the Pascha. We also use this particular form in the rite of Joyous Saturday. So in Matins of Joyous Saturday, we also say this form of the hymn. And it's important to note that the tune obviously shifts. We'll talk about the tunes in a little while. But for now, it's important to understand that this sort of concept of preserving these older texts, or these older practices, on what we call high holy days or solemn occasions, is a concept that was developed or coined by Anton Baumstark, who was a liturgical scholar, and he describes that the majority of ancient practices or more authentic practices are preserved on your older occasions or your most holy occasions, where people were following what's written in the written text and were not necessarily as familiar with the order because it was a high holy day. There's extra, so they follow the books and they follow the rites. There's a lot more to it, but I'm just summarizing so that we understand the concept. So you'll find in a lot of our practices that our really older or really authentic practices, things that we might not even understand sometimes, or why they are the way they are on those occasions, actually preserves for us an older structure that's there. As an example, since we're on this slide, you'll see here the ending of this page is actually the ending of what we call Hello Manasgud or Ta'alu Nasgud, as you see, Salat Bekir, which begins with Amoyni Maran Oshtal, come let us worship. Okay, so come let us worship. And you'll notice that in this case, the text instructs us to pray Nainayit Nodi, which is Psalm 50, after the Amoyni Maranosh, because Amoyni, and I've written about this in the past, if you're interested, let me know, we can talk about it again. This is called an invitatory prayer, and this invitatory prayer begins before the beginning of the Psalms. So Psalm 50 is not an introductory prayer to the hours. Psalm 50 is the beginning of the Pihymnos, which is the name of the Psalms of the hour, or the Psalms that are being chanted for a specific occasion. So in this case, is a good example because on Joyous Saturday, all of our lives, while printed books were written, it actually preserved for us that Amoyni Maran Osht, come let us worship, was prayed before Psalm 50. However, Coptic Reader recently switched this order because they mimic the current structure in the Ajbeya, which is not the older practice. And this is proven by several manuscripts. I don't want to go into it in too much detail, but I'm giving an example of how an older practice is preserved on a holy day or one of our more solemn occasions. And this happens very often, and there are several examples of this all over the place in our rite. Back to Bisharatismus. So here you'll see that Bisharatismus is an Adam hymn. It's an Adam text. What do we mean when we say Adam? I've written about this several times, and my friends have also discussed in detail Michael Helmi and Abun Arsenios, etc. An Adam text in current practice is a hymn that has 4 lines to a single verse. So, that's 4 lines, and each line is approximately 5 to 6 syllables, what we call in Arabic sometimes henket. Okay? And so it's mainly related to syllables and not necessarily musical stress, because the music changes for these different Adam texts, but what you're really left with is this so you're left with this 5 to 6 syllable chant. And that's why the hymns, you can take an Adam text and put it on a different tune and it'll still fit if the tune itself is Adam as well. Watos texts are also 4 lines to a verse, but they have between 7 and 9 syllables per line. And so you get a different structure. The Watos verses are typically longer, and in order to accommodate for those additional syllables, you also need a longer piece of music or a longer musical sentence. So this is going to play a big role in understanding which verses in our current form of the verses of cymbals actually fit within our structure and within the hymn, what was originally there and what was not. So as an example here, you'll notice that in all of the Shere verses, because of this Adam structure, actually let me see if I can make this a little smaller, you'll notice because of the same structure there are similar transitions in the music. So, sharadi, sharami, sharani, sharubi. I know most of us say now sharani she, but older recordings have sharani, sharayo, sharabeniyot marko. And I know the same, we say sharabeniyot, but Ma'alim Fahim in older tracks, sharabe. And so because there are a certain number of syllables for each line, the music also fits accordingly. When we look at the tune for it, that's the shorter tune that's used in more annual or what we call standard days. For example, the verse of Archangel Michael, Sheremi Chail Binishtin Arshial. A lot of times there's a little confusion about this verse because most people say Sheremi Chail Binishtin Arshi to make it work. But what they're not taking into account, and the reason the Mu'allimin keep it as Sheremi Chail is because of the way that the structure actually fits within the music. So, Sheremi Chail, and it moves. What's the right word for this? Trickles over into the next. Same with Stefanos be, right? So there's some sort of musical system here that's not just based on, whatever I can come up with in my head, right? There's some sort of structure for why things are the way they are. Now, we use these, like I said, on the nightly feast, so the Nativity, the Epiphany, and the Anastasis, and we also use it on Joyous Saturday, as I said. I'll discuss the music of it in a few minutes, but I just wanted to clarify that this text is not pertaining to a specific day. This was the older version of the text that was said every day, regularly, these 10 verses. How does this shift into what we have now? And what's the issue with what we have now? A couple of things. Well, number one, we run into the issue of which one to say. We have now apparently 2 introductions. One is called the Adam one and the other is called the Watus one, based on the idea that there are Adam days and Watus days. That's not a very authentic or very correct, or let's say it's not the most encompassing statement to say. Okay? Why is that? Number one, it's not so much that we have Adam and Watus days as much as we do have days in which the hymns themselves of the particular day, like the Psali, like the Tadakiyah, like the Lubsh, are written in the Watus or Adam structure. So it's not that you cannot say an Adam hymn on a Watus day or vice versa. It's that the hymns that were written pertaining to those days that everyone is familiar with are written in Watus. A good example of this is the Ma'an's Doxology Pi Wainin Tabmei, or the famous Arib Salina Piadaw Ashf Sali Watus that we say every day of the week whenever we pray Tasbih. So it's not necessarily that on this day you must only chant the Watus or the Adam. That's not how it works. That's the first issue. The second issue is that even the text that we call Watus is not Watus. So for those of you who are very, very invested in the hymns, when we think about Adam texts, we always think of Amoyni Maran Hosht, and then after Amoyni Anon Khanilaos, and then Wanu Helpis, Wanu Metsamnos, etc., which we're going to get to in a second. And when you think of Watus, you think of the Tarh, the long Tarh, or you think of the shorter versions of it, but the introduction to it is Dan washtem fiyoten agatos, nembev shirisos becherestos, nembeb nauman barakliton, tetriasatoaben. And then there's multiple endings, right? Omosio, or ⲡⲓⲭⲓⲭⲓⲓ whatever. So you'll notice that each line there, ⲡⲓⲭ in agatos, right? It's a longer line as opposed to ⲡⲓⲭ nemepshiri. Okay, so you're getting, even when we're saying ⲡⲓⲭ nemepshiri nembepnoma tueb, the triyasa tueb and omaosius, it's not watos. It's an Adam text still. So the idea of splitting based on the days makes zero sense. The concept is that both of them are Adam text, that's why they fit on the music. When you don't have a fitting music on the text, or when you rather, let me rephrase, when you have a text that doesn't fit well on the music, it shows very clearly. Let me give you a few examples. Let's say I'm saying the shorter tune, and I was to say, Señor apóstolos, in order for me to say Saint Mark, I have to do one of two or three things. Right? I can't just say, it doesn't fit the same way that I have to do Sherenak obima or Sherenak obima, or what most people started to do now to make it make sense, and they jump from the last verse to the next one in order to make the music work, because that Sherenak opimartiros verse is a watas verse. Okay, so if, let's say you have too many syllables for it to be an Adam text. The same occurs with Isos bechristos en sa, right? Isos bechristos en sa is not a, there's no way that that's an Adam text. It doesn't fit. So you either do, people do Isos bechristos en sa. Somehow Ma'alim Ibrahim got it to work where he does something like Isos bechristos en sa, right? But it's still too many syllables to fit into the music, which is Adam. So right then and there, you know, there are verses that are being introduced or borrowed into Pisharetismos that do not belong. So, where do these verses come from? Are any of them older? What's the history of the hymn? Well, we know that this Tanoosht is the oldest form. We can see it in several manuscripts. So this is another name for this hymn here is Synodos, but we're going to talk about that in a few seconds. And you'll notice here again, forgive me, I need to mention this. This again is the Amoini, the Come Let Us Worship, the invitatory prayer, and then it says here, Nainan et Nodi, have mercy on us, O God, or have mercy on me, O God, Psalm 50, before this hymn. Anyway, now we see these 10 verses here, you see them again here, and once more here. There are other versions of the hymn, or rather other texts that can be interpolated into this Pisharetismos when needed. And so you'll find different versions in different manuscripts that can be borrowed. Now, here in Abu Ma'ar, this manuscript is from Abu Ma'ar's monastery, and you'll notice they're titling this Pisharetismos as Synodos Adam. And Synodos means magma. This is where we get the title magma from in our church, liturgically anyway. I'm going to discuss that in more detail in a second, because it mentions all the different ranks of the saints, etc. And this is in the placement itself, or where this hymn is chanted, is Pisharetismos. There are other options that are also in the same manuscript. So, Synodos Pisharetismos Adam. So here's another form that can be used in the Pisharetismos. Okay? And so you'll see, sound familiar? This is what we now use as the introduction for Watos days, except it's clearly listed here as Adam, and the text and the music is clearly Adam. شرتي ككليسية بين تاني أنجيلوس شرتي بارتانوس تسمس بن سوتير شرب ستاوروس تواش بشوي سروف شرب مهاو توكوان بفصوم عن خطف. Right, we use this for Joyous Saturday. And so this is basically quite a long text. Let me actually put it so that it's in the... Let's do it this way so you can see. There we go. So, we're in the appendix of this manuscript now, by the way, where we're putting all the different extra things that can be used. And so here you find this version of this ⲓⲭⲆⲍ. And basically what I'm assuming, or based on how we understand the Coptic mind, here's a lengthy text. It is unlikely that this whole text was said regularly, but these verses can be borrowed when necessary, when there's a feast of one of the particular saints that are mentioned, when there's an occasion, if there's need for extra time, whatever the case may be. And so you'll see some of these verses made their way in to our current practice, like of course there's a little difference here, but you'll find very common things in between here. It's another verse. It's in the original anyway. And so you'll see multiple things like this. And there's many saints here, and how we describe them is very telling, by the way. If anybody was to ever look at this, God willing, I'll be publishing this text soon. But the idea here at the end of the day is the entire text is an Adam text, and it can be borrowed, or verses from it may be borrowed into the other ⲓⲆⲆ that's being used, or that's written within the other contents of the psalmody as a whole. This is one version of the text. We also have another Synodos Adam here. This one, however, is not listed as ⲓⲆⲆ, so you'll find that it's missing the word shere, which proves further the idea that I was saying earlier, that the idea about ⲓⲆⲆ is that it's the salutation. It's all about using the word shere and greeting or hailing or telling the person to rejoice, right? The word shere in Greek or in Coptic has multiple meanings and multiple usages. The first of them is rejoice, ifrahi, or ifrah. And then afterwards it's greetings, salam, and then it's also hail, which is also used as sere. Now, so you'll see here, there's another Synodos here, also in the Adam. Are there Synodos Watos? Technically, yes, there are. You'll find here, in the Abu Ma'ar manuscript, you find a Synodos Watos, and this also mentions the saints. The idea behind the word Synodos here is the magma of the saints, the synod of the saints. Okay? This is the origin of what we call commemoration of the saints in the Tasbihah. That's not a proper naming. I'll explain why in a few minutes. But this right here, these texts, the Synodos, as well as what we call the synagogue, these are the texts that give rise to the title magma. Okay? So this manuscript, BNF 6.9, actually differentiates the Adam and gives the Adam one the name Synodos Adam, and gives the Watos Synagogue Watos. And these texts were quite prominent during the 14th century and probably a little prior, and as a result, psalms were written even on top of these texts. And these texts are what give rise to the name Magma al-Quddisin, or the what we now call commemoration of saints in English is not the proper name for the text that we're calling it. This is the Synod of the Saints, or the Assembly of the Saints that are mentioned. Okay? Now, I want to talk to you about the versions in this manuscript as well, briefly. So you'll notice here in in the manuscript from Abu Ma'ar's, that their Pisharatismus Adam began with Tanoshtim Fiot Nemibshiri. The one in this manuscript actually begins with Amoini Maranosh and the Triasa Tawab, Tefiot Nemibshiri Nebno Matwab. This is what we know for the Adam days, quote unquote. Clearly, it's just another text, and you'll notice that it follows alphabetical order, right? So Alpha Alpha, Weta Weta, Gamma Gamma, Delta, and then A, and it goes through the rest. Very important thing here to note is how this is structured. So you have two verses here referring to the Trinity first, then a verse for the Virgin Mary, then a verse for Archangel Michael, then for Gabriel, etc. However, in our current version, this one umetsemnos has changed, has been altered textually from speaking about the Archangel Michael to referring to the Virgin Mary. And so you'll notice, if I was to sing it in the current tune, one umetsemnos enechreichen be orchen pa, whichever, I cosmos awal hiten bishlelen te Michael. Now, we have one hiten bishlelen te tiageya Maria ti partenos. So we're inserting more words, and so the tune we insert extra parts te tiageya Maria ti partenos to make it work. But the origin of the text is here. Okay? Alright, very good. So also one more thing, pronunciation-wise, very important to understand. And my linguist friends can correct me. I think the beta sound in Old Coptic and from Egyptian is it's called a bilabial fricative. Maybe, yeah. So it's it comes up with the sound w before it becomes v, or even the beta sound that has this w sound. The lips are coming very close. And so they often in Coptic manuscripts, especially in the Middle Ages and even earlier, they replace the one, okoji or omicron, and ha, or what we call ypsilon in Greek. They replace that w sound because it's a consonantal w sound with a beta. So you'll see here, in order to make the alphabetical stuff work, alpha alpha weta weta, they use one uhelpisantan, one umetsemnos, and it comes up also in the tasbeha as well. One ulechneyan. All the manuscripts have also the replacement with the beta there. Clearly it's on purpose. Now, so we've talked about the initial 10 verses. We've talked about the other versions of the text that do exist. We've talked about why some of the verses do not match. You can't just pick a Watus text and put it into an Adam hymn. The music won't work, and vice versa. It'll be too long. The music will be too long if you take an Adam text as well. So this is the origin of these texts. Now, these texts, these synodos and synagogue, are still preserved in Archaic Psalmody, but their titles have been confused a little bit, and they've become unclear. So this is a little faded. I have the book, the hard copy. Maybe I can post a picture later. Claudius Labib titles it, this is published 1911, Psalia Adam, which it is Adam, but it's not listed as Psalia and the others, but it is a Psali-like structure, it's okay. And then he writes, U synagoge atwe min agl ti partenos nemni angelos ni apostolos nemni martyros chen pi apot kiach. Of course, it's not necessarily strictly for apot kiach at all. It was initially a regular text that can be changed at any time, but you'll see here it's relatively the same text for the most part. And afterwards, he also has what's listed as the synagogue. So these are the texts that are present in the BNF manuscript, not the ones from Abu Ma'ar's manuscript. And so you'll see here he has the same texts. He lists this as Psali Watus. And then afterwards, he includes what we call now the commemoration, which again, I do not like that name. I prefer the petitions. And he lists them actually as Naitop Hahan. Hadith Topha. Toph in Coptic is Toph, like Toph Mebshois, and that's why it's written this way. Tophat, and here they are The reason why they call them that is because they're all prayers on our behalf. They're petitions. We're asking the saints to plead, right? To petition God on our behalf, to pray on our behalf. So those are different things. But the synod of the saints, the magma, are these types of texts that list the saints. And some of these texts, as I said, like this one for ⲓⲭⲆⲆ can be used in place or within the ⲓⲆⲆ Adam that we now call the verses of cymbals. So it's very important to understand how this structure works. And if we're going to borrow verses into the hymn, we should not be using Walter's texts. It throws off the music, it's unclear, and it does not fit the ideology at all. I'll do a couple of notes on just the music. Given that the hymn initially was these 10 verses, I would probably suggest that it initially started with the music that we now know as the festal one. It probably was not festive in the beginning. This is my opinion anyway. And then you have this angelos. The fact that the music is again doing that similar thing, right? So that tells me something is up there. Something is probably being shortened, something is being abbreviated, because we do the same when we don't want to say the long parts of hymns, or we don't want to take too much time. We usually do that, like for the ⲓⲆ Adam. That's not initially a response at all. Okay? That's an abbreviation of when I don't have time to say the aspasmos, whatever. Same happens with Nisharobim. Your initial pre-sanctus hymn that's said in the Gregorian liturgy, is abbreviated. It's the same thing. There's no music there. Where you get the music, the particular music, is in the following response. That's a particular music with a conclusion and everything. I don't want to jump into that. That could be another video by itself. But the idea here is that angelos. Right? Now people do angelos, but most of the old cantors do not do that. It's likely indicative that there was a part here that we shortened. Well, let's think about that. Where are we finding that? Oh, ⲓⲆ ⲓⲆ. Right? And so we have that piece. It's most likely that this was somehow over time preserved in ⲓⲆ ⲓⲆ because it's only 4 verses, and we say 2 of them. At many occasions when there's not enough time, we just say 2. But that additional piece is likely preserved in ⲓⲆ ⲓⲆ. Although, this was probably chanted the same way. And because it's an Adam tune, and this is an Adam text, you could, theoretically, rekib this etc. You could do any tarkiba that matches the actual thing. I'm just giving you an example. So this is probably the original tune that this was created in. There could be a plethora of other tunes. There could be several other things that I'm unaware of now. If I was just to suggest, based on what we have now, I would assume that this being an Adam text was created with that tune that we now use for Biwaini. It was probably shortened after needing to say the 10 verses but not wanting to lose that. Also, another form was created, which is what we now know as the standard one, or the annual one. And actually, I think Ma'alim Fahim starts it a little bit differently, and the way that he enters the verses are a little different here and there. So yeah, that's about the music. So now we discussed the text, we discussed the music itself and the development, and we discussed all the other options and how this came to be. I think that's all I have for today. If I remember anything else, I'll be sure to add, or you can reach out to me if you have any other questions. I'm happy to engage with you all, and please remember me in your prayers. I will probably do another Arabic version of this for my friends and beloved cantors in Egypt. So please pray for me, and until next time.